Thank you so much for being here this morning. We're very excited to bring this to life and have all of you here with us. I'm Lisette Galvan, Public Policy Director with NAMI Texas, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I co-chair this work group with Angela Ott with Disability Rights Texas. So we're the Institutional Rights and Civil Liberties Work Group, but we like to shorten it and call it IRCL because it's a very long name. So if we use IRCL, you know what the acronym means now. So our policy issues are a wide variety. For our breakout sessions, we decided to go with having panelists who work in the intersections of behavioral health and juvenile justice, jails and prisons, IDD, and the judicial system. Disclaimer, we know that IRCL issues are both personal and professional to many people. Just a reminder that we are coming together with different perspectives from different organizations and interests. Please be respectful to each other and keep your ears and minds open. So we did that. So just to go over quickly what our focus is within our work group, we have two budget riders as our drivers. The first one is expanding jail continuity of care liaisons program. So this bridges the gap in care by providing comprehensive support to incarcerated individuals with mental health and substance use disorder needs. So the services offered are mental health and substance use disorder screenings, coordinated care queries, safety screenings, access to medication, and service coordination. I'm going to be very brief because we want to give our panelists enough time to really dive deep into the issues. Currently in Texas, there are only 5 pilot sites of the jail continuity of care liaisons. We want to expand that to 10. So our budget rider is very specific in making sure that we're funding 10 more sites so that we can continue to expand this program. As we all know, we have 254 counties and 5 and 10 are not enough, but at least expanding it this session and continue to build upon it will help Texans across the state. Our second driver is expanding the outpatient biopsychosocial approach pilot, or OBI. So this addresses the unique needs of individuals with IDD and co-occurring with mental health. It's tailored to support and enhance their mental health, physical well-being, and social functioning. And so these are the different benefits. It's holistic care, improved health outcomes, enhanced family support, community integration, and cost efficiency. And just like our other budget rider, this one is also at 5 sites, at 5 local IDD authorities, or LIDAs. So we want to expand that to 10 as well. And like our other budget rider, we're really just trying to focus on building upon existing programs that we know work and are effective for Texans across the state. And hopefully we garner more interest in expanding these programs beyond 10 sites after this session. Any questions on these, please use the QR code and we will answer those during the Q&A session. So now we have our breakout with our panelists. So we're going to do a brief introduction for each of them, and then we'll go into our discussion. So first up is Martin Martinez. So Martin, will you grab that mic for me and introduce yourself? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Oh, is this on? Oh, no. Hi, everyone. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
It's for
the recording.
No, it's right there. I think it's happening. Oh. Hi, everyone. My name is Martin Martinez. Hi, everyone. My name is Martin Martinez, and I'm a senior policy analyst at Texas Appleseed. Quickly, how many people are familiar with Texas Appleseed? Okay, great. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, our Public Interest Justice Center.
Yeah, I think it's a location.
Should I?
Just standing up on the other side.
Hello? Is that better?
No, that is. Yeah.
It's standing? No. Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Is this give like the 5-minute?
Just a quick intro.
Okay. My name is Martin Martinez, Senior Policy Analyst at Texas Appleseed. We're a public interest justice center. I work on youth justice team, which focuses on juvenile justice reform and policies to end youth homelessness. There we go.
Okay, oh, it's working. I am the Executive Director of the Texas Judicial Commission on Mental Health. We've been around for about 6 years, focusing particularly on the intersection of the law and individuals with mental illness, intellectual disability, or substance use disorders.
Hey, y'all. My name's Jennifer. I am the Community Advocacy Manager at the Texas After Violence Project. We are a community-based archive that documents state violence. We just started to develop our advocacy department, so to speak. I am a former HOG fellow, so we're going to be doing a little bit of policy, but really trying to educate the community about state violence. One of our priorities is mental health. And I'm also the executive director of LINUS, Justice Impacted Women's Alliance. We are a group of current and formerly incarcerated girls, women, and gender expansive people. Mental health is a huge priority for us, working to train our members as peer support specialists.
And last but not least, Sabrina. Thank you.
Let's see if it works when I'm sitting. Okay, I got. Maybe not. Hello, everyone. My name is Sabrina Gonzalez Saucedo. I am the Director of Public Policy and Advocacy for the ARC of Texas. The ARC of Texas is a statewide advocacy organization that advocates for the civil rights and self-determination of Texans with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I grew up in the Rio Grande Valley and have a sibling with an intellectual disability, which really informs my perspectives and advocacy journey.
All right, thank you guys so much. So now we'll get straight into our panel discussion. And my first question is...
The battery's about to die. That's probably why.
Does this work? Okay, this is better. All right, I didn't want to stand. I didn't want to make it awkward. Thank you, Jen. So what legislative priorities do you think we need to address this session? And I'll start just going down the line with Jen. And so each of you can talk about your own legislative priorities during this time as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think for both the organizations I represent and the members that I work with, we do a lot of work on conditions of confinement, which I'll tell you as a person with lived experience deeply impacts mental health while you're in the system and when you get out. But certainly we're focusing on the mental health of youth, the youth that are currently incarcerated in the Texas Juvenile Justice Department. We hope to, move kids into a system where public safety is intricately connected to public health. I mean, they're really one and the same thing. And so moving kids out of institutions and back into the community to receive their mental health treatment is a huge priority for us.
So we have a pretty extensive list of policy priorities for this legislative session. A lot of them are around the Department of Justice's investigation into the 5 state secure facilities for TJJD. How many people are familiar with that? Just out of curiosity. Okay, good amount. Okay, well, essentially, especially with the mental health aspect, TJJD systemically failed to provide adequate mental health services to youth in their care. They both failed to identify at psychological assessments, failed to coordinate across disciplines with other psychiatric teams during their assessments. Sometimes they punish kids for acting out for their behavioral needs. And oftentimes kids have to wait 1 or 2 months more between therapy sessions. And so it's just at every opportunity, kids are not getting quality mental health care, and it's impacting their ability to rehabilitate. And so that's just one aspect of the DOJ report, which found a host of other issues with our state secure facilities and our juvenile justice system broadly. And so we'll be looking at a few things. And so one of them is limit who is eligible for TJJD. Right now we are considering limiting it to only first degree and second degree felonies, and making sure that lower level offenses like state jail felonies, third degree felonies can be handled at the county level. because they actually have the resources to care for these youth. And this also help mitigate the wait list, which is currently burdening the entire juvenile justice system across the state. So that's one. Another one is establish minimums for the mental health care that you are receiving while in TJJD. So right now, statute requires that you receive mental health care, but there are no minimums according to the degree or the severity of a child's mental health needs. And so we're going in to establish, thank you. So we're trying to establish what those minimums would be, both length of the therapy session and the minimum number of times that a child is seen by a therapist. And those are just a few. We'll also be trying to mitigate punitive policies that needlessly bring youth into the juvenile justice system where they can be better cared for at the county. So for instance, decriminalizing the status offense of running away, raising the lower age of juvenile court jurisdiction. Right now it's 10, we'd raise it to 13. So really young kids, 10, 11, and 12, to be cared for in their communities. And lastly, it's diverting youth who are in residential treatment centers, which youth who are in residential treatment centers for their behavioral needs, and instead of sending them to the juvenile justice system, connecting them to services that better manage their mental health needs. So,
You're a
sorry.
trooper. You're a trooper. Yeah.
Thanks. Right. I hope everybody heard that.
Okay, thank you. So the Texas Judicial Commission on Mental Health is not an organization that can lobby, but we have a committee that works to develop and inform policies that we submit to the Judicial Council, and they can go forward and make those connections with legislators. But the proposals that we developed are many. I mean, we have, I think, 20 different proposals this time. And we are focusing on making sure that the judicial system is not the barrier. And y'all are shaking your heads because you know that sometimes it is. And so we are looking at every type of judge and legal player that may enter the equation. So from the very beginning, when someone may be involved with the civil system, when they may be introduced to the criminal system, trying to expand how law enforcement views diversion, and they know that they have a responsibility right now. Right now there's the Code of Criminal Procedure 1623. One of our proposals is to make that more accountable, or make the people, law enforcement that are under that more accountable, because it says you must divert if there are reasonable centers that you can take someone to, but we want to see them write out a plan to make sure that every law enforcement agency is thinking about that. That's just one example. Another that always hits me very hard is thinking about if someone waits that very long wait to get to state hospital to have their competency restored, and then they come back so that they can move forward in their criminal procedure. If the courts are not on top of their game and communicating, and that system's not working well, then they can miss the window, make someone wait too long, and then y'all have heard this, and then then someone's mental illness might decompensate, start the whole thing all over again. So that's like a perfect example of when the legal system is failing our citizens. And so that is our main focus, is to hear from the people in the field what's not working and where it is failing, and go back in and make sure that those systems are working for you and not against you.
So at the ARC of Texas, we really believe and understand that all policy is disability policy. So whether we're talking IRCL issues or education, housing, et cetera, we really cover the gambit, or at least we try to, with our limited capacity. But one of the issues that our folks face most often is limited or I'll use the word limited access to home and community-based services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. IDD is a huge category of conditions that includes people that have autism spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, and many other conditions. And we have since moved away from the system of direct institutionalization as that era of institutionalization that we had in this country, that if you had an intellectual or developmental disability, that really was the only setting where you could live. But now we really need significant investment so that people can be able to live inclusively in their communities of choice alongside their neighbors, families, friends. And we currently have over 180,000 Texans with intellectual and developmental disabilities waiting for crucial home and community-based services. And they wait over 16 years to get those services. And so this is a crucial crisis that impacts so many people with IDD and their families that needs recognition. In addition to that, we also have a direct care workforce. Direct care workers, personal care attendants are crucial to people with IDD living in their communities. And those wages are incredibly low. And so we have very few workers to fill these roles that are so crucial for success in the community. So those two intangent items are incredibly huge priorities for our organization.
I think this might be like the 5th mic, hopefully the last one. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing that. So we know that stigma carries a lot of weight, especially in the Capitol, when it comes to individuals that have been formerly incarcerated, people with mental illness, people with disabilities. So what are you wrestling with regarding institutional rights in this climate?
Try to answer your question. This mic has given me an incredible amount of anxiety. I'm like, I'm trying to focus on what we're saying. I think it's okay. Sorry. Let's just project. We'll just project loudly. I'm a loud mouth. So I think it's really hard. It feels like it's really hard to get legislators and even sometimes people in the public to hear about people that are in institutions, right? Because it's the idea of those people. And so I think for me and the people that I work with, it's really important for us to be able to go have those face-to-face meetings with legislators and talk with them to try to figure out how to get through that part of the stigma, right? Sometimes I go into offices and they're surprised when I tell them, well, I'm a person with lived experience. I was a kid in TJJD, and it was for something violent, And so to kind of see that, whoa, wait, like you're not the teacher of where I saw incarceration is. And then we're able to have those discussions about, well, what do you think that is? Let's start challenging those thoughts and those beliefs that you have about people that have been in the system. So it kind of sometimes feels like a heavy burden for people with experience. It's like, we're the ones that have to go and battle that stigma. We certainly appreciate allies and other policymakers being able to have those discussions, but it still is kind of this distance. You're still kind of talking about a population, that you're not the face of. So it kind of leaves it up to us to do that. And sometimes that gets really heavy and hurtful. I know that we talked about that earlier, about, man, what do you do when you're not well received? Because I've had people not receive me well the second I mentioned that I was formerly incarcerated. So yeah, it's just doing the kind of the basic relationship building that can feel very tough.
And from our perspective, we try to compliment people who are sharing their lived experience because stories are so powerful and so important to bringing to lawmakers, especially in an increasingly polarized climate, which we're seeing in the legislature. And I think something I personally am struggling with is how our criminal justice system and some of our carceral systems generally have become this catch-all for people and youth with really high needs. And it's really concerning because, the system is not working the way it should be. the spirit of the juvenile justice system is to help heal and rehabilitate you. And the way it's currently operating and the way our probably most important stopgap is before the adult criminal system is actually found to be violating a host of constitutional rights for youth and continue to add to the trauma that a lot of them have been experiencing. And I think it's really hard because I think it's really easy for some legislators to point to this is a partisan issue, right? Like this is maybe like the Democrats and Biden trying to make Texas look bad. But our juvenile justice system has struggled since its creation. Before the Texas Juvenile Justice Department was TJD, it was TYC. And it was born out of a host of scandals from TYC, a lot of which are repeated to today. And so I think, it's a really daunting moment in this legislative session because our juvenile justice system is in crisis. But I know there's an opportunity for us to come together and think creatively and reimagine what does our system need to look like. What reforms do we need to make to actually ensure, we're supporting these youth and helping them and not scarring them more? Because a lot of them face already severe mental health needs. And for a child whose brain is still developing, that's so critical to consider. And so we're going to just be reminding legislature that and trying to make changes where we can.
So I would say that we encounter a lot of fear. We work with mental health of both youth and adults, but because our team is speaking about youth, I'll take on the adult aspect, that the headlines and incite a lot of fear with legislators and the judiciary. And so we're always trying to balance that and understand, and have empathy for that position that if you were the judge and you were making a decision about somebody and they went and committed a heinous crime because you decided to protect the community, that is a valid fear. But I think we need so much more research and education that mental illness does not equate with violence. And right now there's a broad stroke equating those two. And so I'm so glad to hear, Jennifer, that your organization is addressing that, and we do bring in that research. And we'll have the Meadows Institute come in and bring in the science to say that most people with mental illness and intellectual disability are more likely to be victims of crime than perpetrators. And you all know this, but it is still a message that we're communicating and trying to break through that stigma, I think, in everything that we're doing.
I want to echo all of these sentiments for sure. I think that I sit in a really great position to be able to feed off of everyone else. But yes to all of this. And I think that we're really grappling with the challenge of balancing institutional rights for people with mental disabilities amidst increasing involvement of this population in the criminal legal system. Martin talked about how the criminal justice legal system has really served as a catch-all, and especially for the IDD community. We've seen, unfortunately, folks with IDD go directly from a group home to the county prison or county jail. And this is a huge crisis that's happening. And we want the legislature to focus on the root causes of that and not overcorrect in a way that infringes upon the institutional rights and civil liberties of people with IDD.
Thank you all so much. And, as we continue this discussion, I want us to transition and think about our local communities. And so what are the pressures that y'all are seeing that our local communities are facing day to day? What a great question. And I'll speak to our members at Linus. These are formerly incarcerated women, gender expansive people that, yes, they live in Dallas, they live in Houston, but a lot of our folks live in rural counties. And so when we are trying to find them reentry resources, but certainly mental health resources, it's pretty startling to look at that map in the workforce group and see that most of the state, most counties don't have a social worker or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So the local challenges with our population is being able to find those resources where they're at. It's extremely difficult. I often use the
Judicial Commission on Mental Health map. I know that that's not really consumer map, it's more of like for court systems, but that's been helpful to be able to try to locate resources in the community. But it's just an absolute lack of resources for people in rural parts of the state who have been justice involved.
Oh, I definitely want to echo that. So we hear a lot from counties in our work, and depending on which county you're in, your resources vary greatly. And so, like Jen said, a lot of rural counties don't have the same resources like Harris County does. And so, like, I guess for like a bit of context, Harris County used to be one of the counties who would send the most kids to TJD, but through a group of like innovative people, like the probation chief, the district attorney, and a host of other service providers, they would have come together, collaborate, and think what resources we have in the community to serve kids and put rehabilitative services on the front end. So that way we can try to get our kids away from the state. And, you know, not every county is able to do that. Right now, there is a pretty significant wait list of kids who are waiting in counties to go be transferred to TJD. So because TJD is struggling to hire and retain staff, they're not like physically able to safely take these kids in. And so right now, kids are just sitting, waiting. Some of them, their time isn't even counting while they're in county care, and some of them are not getting the services they need. Now, there are some other counties, like Travis County is another example, so near Harris, where they've invested a lot in what services they have to offer. And actually, their probation department has so much room that they're even able to take some of the kids who would otherwise go into TJD, and instead are here in Travis County receiving same services. But again, it varies greatly depending on where you live. So I think a lot of counties are just struggling with their voting system.
Yeah, and I have to echo that, but I will add that in some communities, it is just a resource issue, but it's both. It's not either or. We have seen communities, my colleague Kayla and Hers just walked in, and we've been traveling around Texas doing a mental health law plan where we walk through and do a checklist and then basically an analysis of how they are doing with best practices and mental health laws that are there. And there are some communities that surprise us, that their sheer will and collaboration and just a few things going well, like they happen to have a psych hospital that is working closely with them, that they have moved everyone off their competency restoration wait list, that they have law enforcement bought in, and they are diverting people. And they're not just thinking, oh, we've always taken people to jail, that's what we will do. They are thinking, well, could we have a compromise? Could we have a check-in person that you're able to stay in the community? And it's surprising, it's shocking sometimes that these creative solutions can go a long way. And I don't think everyone should have to do that. I think we need the resources and that kind of collaboration, because we definitely get the feeling of musical chairs, that all of these different professions care very much and want to do the right thing. But when we're pulling chairs out of the system, somebody is falling down, and then we find them all pointing and blaming each other, and just making the problem worse. And so I think we start off by going to the communities and we say, this is a lot, and you're all trying to do the right thing, and thank you, and then let's not blame each other, and add that collaboration that can take you a long way.
So much of this work is interconnected, obviously. And I think that what we are hearing often from families and from self-advocates, people with IDD, is that criminal legal justice involvement. It's the criminalization, really, of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. There is a fundamental lack of understanding of disability in general across society, but when you look at folks involved in the criminal legal system specifically, when you think of jailers, police officers, sheriffs, and I can go on and on, that lack of understanding or cultural humility is very prevalent and leads to the criminalization of people with IDD. So we are constantly wanting to try and inform our legislators about what our community's needs are, what our community looks like, because disability is such a broad spectrum, especially in the IDD world. But expanding that to people within the criminal legal system especially.
think y'all are doing some really great, thoughtful answers to this discussion, and it brings to mind, like, many people do struggle with purple topics, and how are we going to break through in our discussions with legislators to communicate effectively what these issues are and what the solutions that can really drive our work towards a positive impact for these different populations.
Well, I think it goes back to relationships. And I know there's lots of offices that don't want to go in and build a relationship. I don't. And certainly as we become more polarized, it feels like some places I go into is just, that member, it feels like my existence it almost feels like my existence is a threat to them, right? So then it feels like, whether that's as a queer woman or someone that's been in the system, trying to balance when is relationship building, when do we reach a point of this is harmful? This is harmful. I can't continue to try to go into Representative so-and-so's office, just continuing to harm myself, right? Like understanding where your personal boundary is with that is super important. But also, again, understanding that we're in Texas and it is what it is until we're able to vote different people in that will move our priorities, and just finding the place where you can do it. I grew up in a conservative home, and some of my friends also grew up in conservative homes. And so trying to use each other's lived experience on the ways that you can connect to that office, being very strategic about who you send in, which can not feel good sometimes, right? Like that feels kind of grimy, like, girl, I can't go into Howard Swanson's office looking like this. We're gonna send Mandy, we're gonna send Marcy, right? Like, you have to do that, and that doesn't always feel good. But it's like, well, do I want to be right? Do I want to be effective? And so, what are the ways to be effective in relationship building? And that building is very unique and it's very political. And so, keeping that in mind, and then just finding those places that value that we had. There is some value that we connect with. And the longer you build that relationship, you find out they have someone in their family with IBD, or they have someone who has substance use, problem in their history, and then just latching onto that. And I use Valerie Swanson because she's so problematic in some things that she believes in, but I see that she really loves and cares for women and girls and kids. And so it's like, well, then there's our value alignment. And perhaps when you build that relationship, then those other issue areas, maybe they become open to. And that takes a lot of work. And sometimes I think people in policy, let's get to it. And they skip the relationship to get to the doing. You just can't in policy. You have to build relationships with the staffers, most importantly too.
Yeah.
So I think that's the most.
I have to echo that. Relationship building is everything in the legislature. And I think this is a really interesting opportunity because we have a lot of freshmen that are coming into the legislative session. So there's going to be a lot of new relationships being built, a lot of educating that is happening. And so relationships are everything. And I think it's also thinking about strategic partnerships. I think Jennifer said, if somebody might not be the right fit to a office, maybe somebody else can take your place. They're not every office is friendly with Texas Amnesty, surprisingly. And so thinking about what partnerships can we make with other organizations who might be a better face to send that message or deliver what we want to say, right? So I think that's another part of it. And then the third part of it, I think, is also pointing to the data, right? What is the data stating and what historical context do we have to show that this has been going on for forever, right? So the DOJ report, it was a 3-year investigation across all 5 state secure facilities. And to our knowledge, that's the first time any kind of finding like this has ever happened where abuse has been rampant throughout all of the state secure facilities in the state. And I think it's reminding, this is a nonpartisan issue. You have other people in other states, like the Ohio governor right now is making significant reforms to their juvenile justice system, following a host of scandals over there as well. And it's just like, getting people to really look at the situation. This is what the data is telling us. This is the historical context. And just showing them that this is not a partisan issue one way or another. This is just practical policy, right? This is what's gonna be best for our kids. Because I think at the end of the day, we all want to help our youth. I think we go about it in different ways. But it's really, that's where we point to this is what the data is actually saying, and this is the historical context we have. And so considering both of those options, what are the best policy forms we can make? And so I think that has helped us a lot as we try to push different policies at the legislature.
Yes, and I would just add representation to that. And so that's why this coalition is so important and learning about these issues. And I have an experience where I think something might be a good idea. I'll give you an example. Someone in one of the counties was doing a program where they would identify people who were on the autism spectrum with law enforcement so that they would take special care and not assume that maybe some of these actions were threatening. And so as a person that doesn't have that experience, at first I thought, well, that sounds wonderful. As a parent of a 25-year-old with autism and other disabilities who said, oh no, do not put me on that list. I do not want to be identified. I think that's a terrible idea. It opens your eyes and it makes you realize that we need those voices to say, well, why? Tell me about that. Well, that makes me terrified. I don't want to be known. And I wouldn't be in favor of that at all. So again, that representation can, I think, change and shift people's thinking on important issues.
So building upon that, I think that the power of self-advocates is really important, especially in the field of IDD advocacy. We host our various Capitol events and bring our members from all over the state to the Capitol. And, I maybe have gone into an office multiple times and had a great conversation. But when I bring a constituent, a self-advocate with IDD, the entire office stops and listens. And that is incredibly important and powerful. But that takes time and effort and work, and instilling that confidence and self-advocacy skills in our communities is really vital and important. And taking care of our self-advocates in a way that is intentional and not extractive, understanding that this process is so inaccessible, it is so burdensome, and retelling your story is traumatic and hard work. And so balancing that, empowering our advocates to know that they have a voice, and a voice that is powerful at the Capitol, and that they are welcome there.
It's like y'all know what question I'm about to ask. And I even threw you off by moving these questions around a little. But so y'all have targeted exactly what my next question is, and it's bringing in that lived experience into the legislative process and having that representation and meeting people where they're at. So how do we get individuals actively involved who have that lived experience, and how, as all of us are in different organizations and have different networks, how can we use our platform to empower these individuals and amplify their stories?
Well, you said the key word there is empowerment, right? And I appreciate what Sabrina shared, is that, it takes, again, we're not just building relationships with legislators, we're building relationships with self-advocates, people with lived experience. And that takes time, that takes training, that takes walking with them through the halls, that takes an incredible amount of time and investment. And so that's number one. Because, I've been at the Capitol where I've been bustling around between hearings, and policy organization stops me and says, hey, will you testify on our bill today? something with the criminal justice system. We had anybody that we had lined up to testify, and, I know that you were in the system. And, at the time, I was like, well, I want to be helpful, right? But then later on, I thought about it. I was like, well, then you just left me there. I do really understand the bill. So it was very extractive. And so that's something that those of us that have been in this system have experienced with organizations. And it creates as much harm as the institution does, right? Because then again, our people that's fighting for us and with us have treated us just as much as a number and a product and a thing as the system did. So it really is centering the lived experience as expertise. I tell folks that the women in our organization, we're policy analysts, we're writers, we're social media influencers. We're more than just this story. So please don't just drag us along and put us on a poster or put us up in front of a podium. And then, okay, well, you leave us out of the rooms when we're talking about the bill or we're talking about bill language because we're, not seen as, I guess, like children or we're just our story, a commodity. So the very first thing is to always respect that we bring so much more than just a story of trauma. We bring expertise because, when people are like, oh, well, this should work at TJHMD, like I'm talking about, that policy sounds good. I'm like, girl, that is not the way that works at the prison. That's not going to work. And quite frankly, it's going to create a whole bunch of extra stuff that's going to be a problem. And so you don't know that. You've never lived in TDCJ or TJJD, TYC to understand the way that this actually works. You put something on paper, but if you haven't experienced it, you're just creating more problems if you don't understand how the day-to-day works. So empower us, don't use us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Compensation, please.
No, absolutely underscore everything Jen said. It's so important to empower and educate people about one, what they're going into, two, what is the context of which they'll be speaking, and three, also like getting around the building. The Capitol is not an easy place to navigate by any means, and even just going up there and testifying is intimidating by nature. I think all of us here who have like testified dozens of times, can agree that it's still a daunting feat to be there at the podium or at the table with a row of like 9 legislators who are literally taller than you, looking down, and it's hard for anybody to get up and do public speaking and share a story. But on that stage as well, it's a bit more intimidating. So I think empowering them and educating them about what they're doing, where they're going to be in some way, paying them rightfully so. And then I think also like sometimes for the people who aren't able to go and actually have the opportunity to testify is being able to thoughtfully share their experience without commodifying it and doing it like in a sincere way. Because like there are so many stories, for instance, that are in the DOJ report that are pretty heartbreaking, but they're lost in a lot of the articles, a lot of the news cycles. And that's hard, right? It's a dense, and it's not super dense, right? But it's a thick report. Unless you're going through and taking the time to read through all of it, you don't know a lot of those stories. And it's really hard because, and unfortunate, because that is the human nature of like what these policies are doing, right? That is what's actually happening to kids in these facilities. That is their story. And oftentimes they go forgotten or unseen. And so from Advocacy's perspective, we want to be mindful about which stories might be forgotten or not seen, and make sure those are actually heard, and try to be their voice where it makes sense.
I would just add to put your money where your mouth is. Jen is speaking at our conference with 500 people in the room and another, sometimes 1,000 people tuning in online. We definitely have a commissioner that's seated at the same table with judges. Our committees are open, and we're just trying to be intentional about it. But I'll add, we also always have to be open to the criticism. Like when people tell us, yeah, I didn't really know about that meeting, or I think at our very first summit, we got some feedback, maybe from someone in the room, we need more lived experience in this. And instead of, being defensive about that and trying to close that door, we leaned in and said, you're right, let's bring it on, tell us how to do this. So I think organizations being open to that feedback too.
Yeah, that's incredibly key. I think that, again, building that relationship with advocates and empowering them is really key. So the Arc of Texas has been engaging in our tour across Texas, and we visited 11 different chapters throughout the state. Instead of the onus being come meet us in Austin, we are going to them. And I've visited places in the state I've never visited before, which has been super exciting and fun, and a really tangible way to provide legislative advocacy training to our advocates and opening up the door for them to meet us in Austin and compensate them for coming to Austin. That is incredibly huge and incredibly empowering. And that doesn't answer every single question. Obviously, it's an ongoing conversation, but I think meeting advocates where they are and bringing them into the fold is so key.
Thank you all so much. So insightful answers to that heavy question. So my last question before we go into Q&A is, how are you going to take care of yourself? Knowing how this legislative climate is, how are you going to navigate it in self-care?
Well, I listen to a lot of Taylor Swift. Brought her up. I do it every conference, even at the summit, in front of judges and DAs. I make sure to honor Taylor Swift. Well, my self-care, it really is music and my little kitty at home, whose name is Taylor. But at the building, right, at the Capitol, it's important to do self-care, before and after, but certainly while you're there. And I think for me, it really is being with the women that I advocate with. That community of formerly incarcerated women, and Mandy had to take a meeting right now, but it just, to be able to support each other, to go to those offices, to testify and watch women come to life that never had a voice before, to be able to go, girl, I just testified in front of the Senate, and then go to the chicken bowl down the street and have, enchiladas, and then come back and, sit, in those little spots or in the grill and laugh and joke and do TikToks out in the rotundal. Those were my favorite moments of session. And we still laugh about that stuff, right? So, I say that resilience, sometimes we hear the word resilience in mental health, and we can kind of feel like, well, what if you don't have that? Resilience doesn't come from here, it comes from community. And so those women helped me build resilience through TYC, through TDCJ, and they helped me build resilience at the Capitol because we're there together as a community. So I always suggest going, I'm just fortunate that my coworkers happen to be my community, but just having that with you during session at that building is really helpful for my mental health.
Love Taylor Swift too. So I think for me, it's one, being diligent about carving out time for my family and friends. They ground me through a lot of stressful situations, so being able to do that is so important. 2, carving out time to be outside. I'm really fortunate to live in Austin. We have a lot of beautiful spaces. So being able to take a breath and just walk around and be with my thoughts is so helpful. And then 3, I think also, this is a really stressful time, but I also try to appreciate that it's a really unique opportunity not a lot of people get to do. I guess if I was talking to my high school self, I would never would have thought I'd be helping to reshape what Texas could look like, right? And we don't always win some of the battles, but we do win a few of them, so that's kind of nice too.
Yeah, self-care and then connecting with your people. I've never met Sabrina and Martine before, and I've learned something sitting on this panel today, and it fires me up. We spend a lot of days at our computer writing, and then it can feel heavy and lonely, but connecting and knowing that we're all in this, rowing in the same direction, it means a lot.
Agreed. On the Taylor Swift point as well. To be clear, I think that finding that community is really important at the Capitol. Sometimes it starts by commiserating together because you're like, oh my God, we're gonna be here till 8 p.m. and you're there, you start your day so early and sometimes it ends so late and you give testimony so late and you don't get any questions from the panel or there are only 3 people there and the rest of them are on their phone and dozing off and it can feel very heavy. Session is a very rough time, and so taking that time for self-care and being with the people that ground you is really important. And I totally relate to the grounding efforts and importance of really seeing the importance of what we're doing and realizing you're not alone in that struggle. There are a lot of people that are working in this scene toward a common goal.
Thanks so much.
So we have a few minutes left. I'm going to hand this over to Angela for our questions. So in case you need the QR code, it's up there. Angela, what do we have?
So I will also preface, so it is 12:06. Lunch starts at 12:15. Originally, we were thinking of letting y'all out at 12:10 because elevators, stairs, small, one people. But we will, we can keep going or we'll leave the room. But okay, so thank you to everyone who has submitted some questions. I will try to get through as many as possible. This one I think is particularly for Martine and Jen, and then also Christy. And Martine, you touched on this a little bit, but what steps do you believe are necessary at the school level to prevent students from entering the juvenile justice system?
I think so. We have an education justice team, so I feel like I'm kind of encroaching into the area a little bit. But from my personal experience and what we've talked about together, a lot of the policies that the ledge is starting to push are creating essentially a pipeline to the juvenile justice system. So for instance, vaping, right? A lot of kids are being caught up in vaping because 1, it's so easy to get a vape, right? But 2, sometimes they're getting cartridges with THC in it. And so in some counties, kids are being charged with felonies for it. Now, am I saying it's good for kids to be vaping with THC? No. But do I think they should be getting a felony charge for that? No, absolutely not. That is not helping anybody. So I think it's really looking at, are the policies we're creating funneling kids into a broken system that is under federal investigation? Or are we actually doing stuff to address their needs early on? And are we investing in prevention? And especially for our at-risk communities. So Texas Appleseed has done a lot of work to try to ensure that youth, because I also work on the issues related to youth homelessness. And so oftentimes that population is really vulnerable and so also being funneled into the juvenile justice system. And so we pushed a bill and passed it during the 2019 legislative session. And it basically barred youth who are experiencing homelessness from receiving out-of-school suspension for every reason except for a narrow few, right? Really severe instances. And that's because of out-of-school suspensions, where are these youth gonna go if they're experiencing homelessness and they're unaccompanied, right? We found out, we did a research dive, and schools are still expelling students illegally. And so I was really thinking about okay, 1, we have had some policy meetings in the past, but are they actually doing what they're supposed to be doing? And are schools actually, if schools are resorting to just giving kids out-of-school suspension or just punitive policies, why is that? Maybe our schools need more support to figure out how to handle these in-house, right? I know during ARPA funding, schools are able to do a lot of really creative things. And now that that funding is gone, American Rescue Plan Act, sorry, I didn't stop at the beginning. But now that the funding is gone, schools are really feeling the crunch. And a lot of those programs, they weren't able to sustain. And so it's really being mindful and thinking about if schools are funneling kids or resorting to punitive policies, why is that? What support are they not getting? And how can we give them that support?
Yeah, and when I think of this question, it takes me back to being 13, 14, 15. I was arrested when I was 15. I was one of those kids that, my teachers told my attorney during my trial, I knew something was wrong. For 3 years, 2 or 3 years, I knew something was wrong. I heard the kids talking. I saw behavior, and I didn't know what to do. I'm just a teacher, and especially in rural areas like East Texas, the stigma around mental health. If we don't somehow find a way to include faith-based the faith-based community in rural areas, we can forget it, because they rule the landscape in rural East Texas. And so this stigma around mental health, and then the school at that time didn't have anything. And I think a lot of my schools still don't have anything in terms of a social worker or mental health supports. And I see that, and I often, when I tell my story, like it was an off-ramp, right? Like that road that was taking me down to the juvenile justice path that ended up in the adult system. That was 27 years when all we had an off-ramp. And there were teachers, like I think about that now and it makes me angry. Like, you could have done something. You could have stepped in. The school, we know the school is usually the first place that we see that kids have struggles with mental health. And I am an example of what that looks like when someone at the school doesn't step in to help kids that are struggling. So I would say, having those mental health supports and social workers at the school. Teachers have an incredible job already. They're trying to teach. They can't be everything. So giving them the supports that they need to help kids at school, it would have saved me 27 years from the old system.
Sorry, one last thing too. Like, I think it's also not forgetting the progress we've made and going back on it. It's like, I've heard some like murmurs of senators and other like representatives talking about criminalizing truancy and going back on the progress we've made for it. Like, if kids can't go to school, right, let's figure out why it is that they're having issues getting there. Let's not penalize them for it. Like, we've been there, we've done that, we've seen it doesn't work. Why are we gonna go back? So I think it's just also reminding the legislature, like, this reform, this policy did more damage than good. Why would we go back to that?
Not criminalizing behaviors that are manifestations of disability.
Yes.
Which I could go into a whole seminar on with that cliffhanger some more.
Yeah.
TED Talks available.
Yeah. Podcast.
Well, it is 12:13, much as it's 12:15. Thank you all for being here. Please give a